Hey guys, I'm XBT, Challenger player on EU West, and today we're going to continue with our guide on the Void game tree. In this part of the guide, I'm going to elaborate on the Hypercarry variation, where we'll be focusing on finding Jinx and Draven. I'd recommend you to have already seen the first part of the video where I focus on the openers and the basic idea behind the three void comps, which will revolve around either Hypercarry, which we go over in this video, or assassins or sorcerers. That first video covered a lot of openers as well as when you should go into the void tree and the basic fundamentals of the void tree, why it's so powerful, as well as some of the early game itemization. Now let's talk about some of the endgame team comps. The first endgame team comp will revolve around finding Jinx. You basically end up here by getting to level 7 and then you either already have Jinx or you have a bunch of attack speed items such as RFC, Kinsu's, or attack damage items such as Infinity Edge, Bloodthirster, Runon's Hurricane, and Red Buff will be fine on Jinx as well. And then you're going to be either looking for Jinx or Draven at level 7, and you're basically rolling down. You might have come from an assassin combination where, for example, you might have had Rek'Sai, Kha'Zix, Kassadin, and maybe Rengar and Zed, and you were putting your items onto Rengar or Zed, and it just so happens that while you're rolling down, you come across a lot of Jinxes. You only need Cho'Gath 1 for this to work, although obviously upgrading him to tier 2 is good, but you can worry about upgrading him later. What you really want is you want to upgrade your Jinx or Draven to tier 2. So I'd suggest while you're at level 7, you try to upgrade your Jinx or your Draven to tier 2 because they're going to be doing all your damage. You want them also to be a bit tankier. They gain a lot of health when they get upgraded. It's going to allow them to stay alive longer and deal more damage, basically. So when you get to level 7, this could be an example of how your team composition may be. If you're going for this team comp in the early game, you may already have picked up some Gangplanks. He might be upgraded by this point, preferably. You don't need a Runons on him, but it's a decent item. Hush is also a good third item. Otherwise, you want a Morello's or Red Buff on him, one of the two. You want your Jinx. You've been preparing items for Jinx already. And this is a pretty good positioning because you'll have your brawlers in the front line apart from Blitzcrank. You put Vi on the other side of Blitzcrank because what's going to happen is Vi will hook an enemy player over here, and it's a bit weird that you want them to hook someone to Jinx. The reason for this is actually that when Blitzcrank hooks someone, Vi will be on the opposite side of the map, and her ultimate targets the furthest person. So it's actually going to target whoever gets hooked by Blitzcrank. And so that's going to be really good. It's a very good synergy here. The Hextech bonus is also really great. This comp comes online pretty early at level 7 because the Hextech bonus with Jinx and Vi is very powerful at level 7. At level 7, there's not going to be too much flexibility once you find Jinx. You could switch Gangplank out for another Gunslinger. You may have Lucian instead. You could also have Misfortune. Although my preferred choice would always be Gangplank. GP2 is better than MF1 by far. If you've managed to upgrade MF to level 2, then you could use her instead, but usually that doesn't happen until later in the game. This team composition does have flexibility later into the game, and you can build it into something more powerful, which we're going to go into. So this would be an example of what you could do at level 8. You could basically get rid of your Void at this point, just keeping your 2 Brawlers. If you do this, make sure to keep your other, your Kassadin or your Kha'Zix, whichever one you use, on the bench, in case you want to bring the Void buff back in. Against some team compositions, such as Nobles or a bunch of Knights, having the Void buff can be really valuable because it deals true damage against the magic resistant armor. So Void can be really good against those types of units. But otherwise, if you're just looking for a beefier frontline, then 6 Brawlers gives you a big health boost. Imagine putting in 400 extra health on 2 more units. That's pretty massive. And once again, you can have it paired with a gunslinger. This composition is possible to create at level 8. I'd always want to have a second gunslinger with a Jinx comp because she's going to be your main carry. She will deal a lot of damage, and that's why it's important to add another gunslinger to give her even extra power, since a lot of the team composition's damage is powered through her. What you could do at level 8 also is, instead of having these 2 extra Brawlers, you could keep the Void buff. So let's say that you decided to go with Kha'Zix, and instead of having 6 Brawlers, you could just look for some other unit to add. So it would usually end up being some legendary unit. Quite a few will work. Yasuo will work. If you put in Yasuo, then you could aim to get like 6 3 Blade Masters, at level 9, if you try that. Kale is always a decent option if you can 2-star him. You could maybe get Sejuani plus Volibear instead of Vi, or instead of Blitzcrank, although I would much prefer the Blitzcrank plus Vi synergy. I think that works better. So there's a few options at level 8 if you decide to keep the 3 Void, though I would tend to just prefer having 6 Brawlers in there with Volibear and Warwick. It's a bigger frontline. Finally, at level 9, this will be the very late game. You won't get here too often, but if you do, what you can do is you can have your 3 Void and your 6 Brawlers. Very tanky team. You will do a lot of damage also to those Noble players or those Knights players. It's gonna work very well until a certain point when the Noble player gets like Swain too. Kale too. Like, after a certain point in the game, the Noble player will get Kale too and have a bunch of items on him. After that point, the Nobles player will win. But if you're high rolling and the Noble player is not, then you can usually end the game before then. And these compositions in the Void Tree are some examples of compositions that can actually beat Nobles until the very late game. Again, if you don't need the Void buff, or if you don't think you need it, you could get a 2-star legendary Yasuo, Swain, Kale. They're all gonna work. But that's it for the Jinx-based comps. It's very simple. I hope that this was helpful. Let's move on to the Draven-based comps. Sorry. Notice that in the late game I put a redemption here. Like, if you get some kind of weird items, you could just put redemption onto your Warwick, or like you could place redemption or the other item is also Zephyr. These items work really well on Warwick because he's kind of like this throwaway bruiser. He doesn't really serve much purpose, so you can really place him wherever you want in the late game. And I like to put these types of items on him, like Redemption or Zephyr, because in the late game I can target one or two players specifically with the Zephyr, and that can be really game changing in the late game if you can hit the carry with it actually. Or you could also just leave Redemption on him, put him in the front line, and he's gonna be one of the first brawlers to actually die. It's gonna heal up your entire team. That will be quite big as well, actually. You can actually put the Redemption on him earlier in the game too, and use him more as a frontliner that way. Now let's actually move on to the Draven comps. So the first thing I want to say is that Draven comps do not generally synergize as well with brawlers as Jinx comps. The reason for this is because Jinx has a direct synergy with Vi, who is it's a very strong Hextech synergy. So it's harder to find any direct synergies. That being said, Draven is still a very powerful unit in his own right, and so you can put Draven into most comps and he's going to deal a lot of damage and be a very strong carry anyways. Again, the strategy is pretty similar. You want to get to level 7 and you want to roll, and whichever carry you manage to upgrade first, you want to pick up, like, what if you are going for the Hypercarry strategy because you've saved up a lot of items, you've been preparing items for them, or you happen to find an early Jinx or Draven, you want to upgrade them as soon as possible at level 7 before they are took out of the pool, because these are two very popular champions. There's only 13 of them in the pool. If you wait too long, they may be gone, and you may have to wait until many people are eliminated before you're able to upgrade your Jinx or Draven. That's not a good scenario to be in. Again, these types of comps are also very good to transition into from assassin comps. So if you had items on Rengar or Zed earlier, you could transfer those items to Draven or Jinx very easily. They use similar items, and these comps scale better into the late game. However, the assassin comps are better in the early to mid game. You may want to switch into these comps if the game goes to the late game, or you may want to switch into the comps if you're just very healthy in general with an assassin comp, but you come across a lot of Dravens or Jinxes. Because if you're very healthy, then you can aim to win the game by switching into a Hypercarry comp. So this would be an example of a level 7 comp. You would have your 4 brawlers, again Jinx and Vi are positioned like this. Sorry, Vi and Blitzcrank are positioned like this. You've got your 2 other brawlers, and you just add an Imperial buff. In this case we got Darius. He's a very simple guy. 1-star unit. He should be easy to pick up along the way. At level 8, what you could do is you can keep your 3 Void, and instead of having 2 Imperials, you could have 3 Blade Masters. In this situation, I got Gangplank and Camille. I got Camille because Camille synergizes directly with Vi, which is very good. You now have a 3 Blade Master synergy, and your GP and Draven will be doing a lot of damage. GP will act as a good secondary carry. Again, if you're going into a Hypercarry build, GP is always going to be a good pickup in the early game. If you don't value Void buff, you could use an Imperial. Ideally, you'd use Swain at level 8. However, if you can't find Swain, Darius or Katarina will also work. Again, if you get to the late game and you manage to get to level 9, you can basically have 3 Blade Masters. Over here we got Draven, Gangplank, and Yasuo. Yasuo will simply be better than Jinx at that point. You might have... I put in Warwick here because we decided to sell Vi in order to get Vi's items onto the Swain, basically. So this is why also putting Morello's and GA onto Vi is fine, even if you don't want to keep her later, because you can transfer items very well onto Swain in the late game. And on Warwick you can just either put on a Redemption or Zephyr. Zephyr works great in the late game. We can look and scout our final opponents and position the Zephyr wherever their carries are based and shut them down that way. Again, if you want, you can get rid of the Void buff and put in some other legendary that you manage to 2-star. Kale will work. Although we already have Swain and Yasuo in this situation, I think that having the Void buff will be quite beneficial in this meta against people who play Nobles and Knights. So this will be it for today's video. I covered the Hypercarry variations of the Void game tree, where you start off with your Void build, go into 4 Brawlers, and then transition into getting a Hypercarry in the form of Jinx or Draven. If you didn't watch the first video about openers and early game, please watch that. It talks about the fundamentals of the Void game tree. In the next video, I'm going to focus on the Assassin game tree, where we talk about Rengar comps, as well as possibly putting in 4 ninjas. Finally, I'll make a separate video on the Void plus Sorcerer compositions. If you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on my Twitch channel. I stream almost every day on twitch.tv/PRXPT. Thank you for watching, everyone, and until next time, peace.